welcome you watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Our big focus on the show today is the French President's state visit to India. French President Emmanuel Macron is in India on a two-day state visit. Invited by the Indian government as the chief guest at tomorrow's Republic Day celebrations, Macron arrived in Pink City, Jaipur this afternoon on the first leg of his visit. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar received him at the airport. Pictured shaking hands and taking selfies with the local residents, Macron's first stop was the famous Amer Fort, where he took in the sights and sounds of Rajasthani culture. Next up, the French president was joined by Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the historic Jantar Mantar Observatory, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The two leaders then embarked on a roadshow termed Shobha Yatra, a first of sorts for a visiting dignitary in India. Hawa Mahal, another iconic structure in the old city, was also on the itinerary. As we speak, Prime Minister Modi is hosting President Macron at a private dinner at the Rambagh Palace, a 19th century Maharaja's palace converted into a luxury hotel. This is where bilateral talks are also taking place. Later tonight, the two leaders will head to New Delhi. The French president is accompanied by a ministerial delegation and a large business delegation as well. This is Emmanuel Macron's third visit to India and second state visit. The first was in 2018. Macron visited Delhi again in September last year to attend the G20 summit. Significantly, this is the sixth time that a French leader will be the chief guest at India's Republic Day parade, an indicator of the growing ties between the two countries. In fact, India and France are marking the 25th anniversary of their strategic partnership. France became India's first strategic partner in the Western world. For France, India was the first non-European partner. Last July, Prime Minister Modi was the guest of honor at the Bastille Day celebrations. That's the French National Day. The two countries had then signed the Horizon 2047 roadmap. PM Modi was conferred with France's high civilian honor, the Grand Cross of the Legion of Honor. This visit by Macron comes at a time when the Indian and French governments are negotiating multi-billion-dollar deals for French fighter jets and submarines for the Indian Armed Forces. India is looking to procure 26 Rafale M fighter jets for the Indian Navy's first indigenous aircraft carrier, the INS Vikrant, as well as 3 Scorpion-class submarines to be jointly built by the two sides with technology from France. This will likely figure in the bilateral talks. Macron is also hoping to sell 6 nuclear reactors to India. Defence is perhaps the most significant area of cooperation between the two countries. France is India's second largest arms supplier and has been one of its oldest and closest partners in Europe for decades. According to the French presidency, the talks between Macron and Prime Minister Modi will cover defence cooperation, collaboration in the Indo-Pacific region, challenges such as terrorism, climate crisis, poverty eradication, strengthening business ties and cross-investments. The two countries are key partners in the Indo-Pacific region, with China widely perceived as the common threat. In recent years, France has emerged as one of India's strongest partners, often extending crucial support to India, even at international forums, including the UN Security Council. Interestingly, President Macron accepted the invitation for the Republic Day celebration at short notice after US President Joe Biden had conveyed his inability to travel to India. Many see this as a mark of strength of the bilateral ties between the two countries. Also, this visit underlines the deep and personal friendship that has evolved between Macron and Prime Minister Modi since Macron's last state visit to India in 2018. It cements France's position as one of India's closest allies, and the personal chemistry and camaraderie between the two leaders has become central to the Indo-French strategic partnership. And joining us now to discuss the significance of this visit is a special guest. We have with us on Global Lens tonight Ambassador Sibal, former Foreign Secretary of India. Sir, thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens tonight. Great to have you with us. As I mentioned, India and France are marking the 25th anniversary of their strategic partnership. This is Emmanuel Macron's third visit to India and the sixth time that a French leader will be the chief guest at India's Republic Day parade. Now, Macron is enjoying royal Indian hospitality in Jaipur. But according to you, how significant is this visit? Is it largely ceremonial, high on symbolism, with perhaps any big-ticket announcements unlikely?
Well, of course, it is ceremonial in the sense that he's been invited as chief guest at our Republic Day tomorrow. But behind this ceremonial honor that is being done to him is a very strong strategic message that within 6 to 7 months of the Prime Minister being the chief guest on Bastille Day July 14th in Paris last year, Macron has come to India as the chief guest on our Republic Day. This is quite unusual, even between very friendly countries, because generally you space these visits in order to get the maximum advantage out of them, because within 6 to 7 months, things can't change so much in terms of the agenda, especially as the July 14 visit came out with very substantial outcomes in many different areas. So while this will be a ceremonial visit, which sends a strategic message, this will also be an occasion to take stock of what was agreed, how far the initiatives have progressed, if there are any hurdles, to ginger up the bureaucracies to implement those initiatives quickly, and also discuss new areas of cooperation, because the international situation is evolving. There are new challenges. After all, there are all sorts of discussions going on on the economic side in the WTO. On the political side, you have the Ukraine war, you have now the war in Gaza, and then the Houthis are just disturbing sea lanes in the Red Sea, which is a big problem for India, and India has openly expressed its concerns. Then there are these larger issues of the French position in Africa becoming more difficult. They have lost ground. And India, as a leader of the global South, and with strong links with Africa, can be indirectly helpful in terms of the French desire to have a more direct relationship with the global South in order to maintain its own strategic autonomy, as it were. Because remember, France has always had a problem with the Anglo-Saxon world. And within Europe now, Germany has very clearly signaled a very pro-Atlantic, a pro-US tilt. So the French-German tandem that was the root of stability in the European Union has got disturbed. The Anglo-Saxon countries are trying to manage the security of Europe, in which France does not have as central a role as it would like to have as a permanent member of the Security Council, as a major nuclear power, with a very strong defense production base, with space capabilities, and a great tradition of diplomacy, and in fact, along with Germany being the progenitor of the European Union in that sense. So France thinks it has international responsibilities and wants to play a bigger role. But the Europeans want to rely on the United States of America for their security and think that these are French ambitions to play a larger than life role, etc., etc. So in this context, larger context of trouble in the European Union and all the conflicts that I've mentioned, and France losing ground in Africa, and then of course the entire Indo-Pacific area where France is a resident power. It has a large population. It has military forces stationed in this area. It is very concerned about about China in terms of the inroads they are making in the Western Indian Ocean, where France has territories and interests, as well as in the Pacific, where France has overseas territories. So they want to preserve their influence and their equities in this area. And India is an obvious partner of choice. In the sense that India has the strongest navy in the Indian Ocean, and there can be very good collaboration between the two countries in the Indian Ocean area. And in the last July 14 meeting in Paris, it was also agreed that India will also involve itself in security matters in the Pacific. Also, this was the new Indo-Pacific vision that the two countries had agreed on. And finally, of course, there is the defense element. Now, why defense? There is sometimes a feeling that, France is very friendly towards India, etc., because it wants to sell more arms. Now, this is a very wrong way of looking at it. I mean, if India doesn't want to buy French arms, nobody can push India to buy them. But India does that because France is a reliable and trusted partner. It has never applied sanctions on India, even after our 1998 nuclear tests,
Exactly.
when President Chirac said clearly that it will be business as usual. So it is a trusted partner. And we know that we can rely on France. And today, because France does not want to lose ground in the international arms market, if you like, they are willing to transfer major technologies to India. It is for us to decide how much we want to take and how much this will interfere with our Atmanirbharta goal in defense manufacturing. Therefore, a lot of decisions we have to take insofar how far we want to go with France in terms of defense collaboration. But yes, of course, in terms of defense manufacturing in Atmanirbharta, if there is joint production, joint development, then yes, the doors are open to France because France will gain and we will gain. So this is a very important area of our strategic cooperation, a very vital area because India faces a lot of defense challenges.
Yes.
And therefore, we need these advanced technologies and also critical technologies, like we have in the United States, the ICET, where critical and emerging technologies are the area of collaboration. With France also, it has some very advanced critical technologies too. Quantum computing and what have you. And therefore, this is an area also on which there is a lot of prospect in terms of advancing our bilateral ties.
Undoubtedly. And I will dwell on the defense cooperation aspect in greater detail in just a moment. But before that, let me ask you this question. It's been widely reported that President Macron accepted India's invite for the Republic Day function at short notice after President Biden said he was unable to travel to India. Now, many commentators have said this proves the strength of the bilateral relationship and that it also sends out the message that today India has many powerful friends. Biden is not the only one. Do you agree?
No, I think the first part of what you said is true, in the sense that it was very gracious of the French president to have accepted this invitation, knowing that he was a bit of a stand-in since President Biden expressed his inability to accept the invitation. And mind you, France is a major international power. And within France, there are a lot of issues that President Macron is grappling with and which requires constant attention. There are protests in France. As usual, the politics is very divided. There are these very difficult immigration issues. There have been, as you know, the Yellow Vest movement and strikes of different kind and this and that. Recently, there has been a change in prime ministers. And of course, as I said, there is this conflict in Europe and in the Middle East, and etc. So there's a lot that requires President Macron to stay put. And the program of presidents of major powers is not that flexible that they can just change their program and make themselves available easily. But nevertheless, I mean, he took this opportunity to show his own regard for India, to demonstrate the depth of the strategic ties and build on them further. And of course, he would have had in mind, and the French certainly have had this in mind, I know, that whereas Sarkozy and Hollande were chief guests at our Republic Day, and before that, President Chirac and President Giscard d'Estaing, President Macron, this is his second term now, has not been chief guest of our Republic Day, and they wanted that. And I think that wish has been fulfilled, though in circumstances which were not the most congenial in terms of decision making. But I must say he has been very gracious. But insofar as the signal that we are saying that if President Biden doesn't come, we have other friends, I don't think that it is this kind of a competition, really. Because President Biden is himself involved in major political battles at home, major political issues that are confronting his administration, the Ukraine war, the manner in which he's conducting it, and of course the Middle East war is being highly contested, and there is Trump. And so there is a State of the Union address that he has to make this month or next month or whenever. So he was genuinely preoccupied. And then he's not a young man. He came for the G20 meeting and then coming again for January 26. I think, given the state of his health, would not have been that easy for him to do. So I think we would have understood why he was unable to come. But we needed a substitute. Remember when the Sultan of Oman did not come, we asked the King of Bhutan to step in. But this time, here was an opportunity to invite the French president, given the excellent personal equation between the two leaders, as you mentioned in your opening remarks. I think President Macron thought it was a good opportunity to stress the closeness of ties between the two countries, and he accepted the invitation. And I don't think we had in mind a kind of a signal to Biden that if you don't come, we have other choices, because we are attaching a great deal of importance to our ties with the United States. And in some ways, frankly, this is the most important relationship we have today.
You're right. And of course, it was very gracious of the French president to have agreed to come at short notice. Now, you know, as I mentioned, France became India's first strategic partner in the Western world. For France, India was the first non-European partner. Correct me if I'm wrong, but France was transferring defense technology to India long before the US decided to do the same in 2023. France, as you mentioned, is a country that has stood by India even after our nuclear test. When countries like the US were busy imposing sanctions on us, France opposed those sanctions. France has supported us in various international forums like the UN Security Council. Therefore, would it be correct to say that France has indeed emerged as one of the most reliable partners for India?
Yes, of course. Because with the United States, although it's the most important relationship, it comes with a lot of baggage. Because United States does not really believe in partners of equal status. I mean, you know, they dominate all the big powers in the world. I mean, the Western powers. And so therefore, the manner in which they think and conduct their foreign policy, they would want countries like India to be more than partners, to be actually allies, if not formally, but in effect. Which is why whatever we do with them comes with a lot of conditionalities and a lot of expectations on their part. Although, of course, lately they have been a little more pragmatic, because India is rising and India's usefulness is recognized. The China challenge is very big. India is the only country that can stand up to China in Asia. Therefore, they have that consideration that they must build India and keep India in the larger Western bloc, rather than India strengthening its ties with the blocs which are China, which are Russia and China dominated, like the SCO or BRICS or whatever. So there is and then of course, as you know, we are blasted every now and then by the US press, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and what have you. They are on a rampage against India on democracy issues, human rights issues. There are human rights organizations, the US, what is it called? Commission on International Religious Freedoms,
Right.
and Human Rights Watch and all that. They keep attacking us. In fact, there is a huge, and Foreign Affairs magazine and their think tank, there's a huge disconnect between the US government and how it looks at the India relationship, and how the US academia, the think tanks, the press looks at India. With France, we don't have that problem.
You're right.
Yes, we do. No, we do. No, let me correct myself. The French press also is very negative. Though I was very happy that a few weeks ago, their Le Point magazine, which is a kind of India Today kind of a magazine there, it had a 78-page supplement on India. And I read through all the articles, and I think it was largely quite balanced. Of course, they cannot but talk about minority issues and human rights issues and what have you. But this was, in a sense, a minor part of a much larger positive uh, image of India. But then, if you look at Le Monde, Libération, or France 24, their reporting on India, it remains very negative. And in fact, many of the French activists on the rights front actually condition European thinking. So there is a problem on the ground. But at the government level, there is no interference in our internal affairs. There's no Khalistani stuff that goes on, etc., etc. So it's a more comfortable relationship. It's a more equal relationship. And it's a more manageable relationship from that point of view, because France is a very important country, but it doesn't have the international clout that a country like the United States has. And therefore, I think the option that we have in the Western world of close relations with France is very vital in terms of projecting that we have an important pro-Western element in our foreign policy.
Absolutely. And you said it's a more comfortable and, equal relationship. The US should really stop lecturing us about human rights, especially given the number of Palestinian civilians who've died in Gaza and the Biden administration's unstinting support to Israel's war in Gaza. But moving on, since you referred to defense cooperation being a very significant aspect of this relationship, this visit by Macron comes at a time when the Indian and French governments are negotiating multi-billion-dollar deals. India looking to procure 26 Rafale fighter jets and also 3 Scorpion-class submarines. This will be a deal worth 90,000 crores. Macron is also hoping to sell nuclear reactors to India. Now, are we likely to see rapid progress on that front in the near future, in your opinion, even if the deals are not completely sealed during this trip?
Oh, no. The negotiations are going on. Negotiations will be complex. They will be very complex. Price negotiations, the degree of technology transfer, how this will be phased out over how many years, and the price factor and everything else. But the decision has been taken, and the French are not going to lose this contract, these 2 contracts. So there are important considerations on both sides to see closure, which is favorable to both sides. But this will go on for some time. That is one aspect. Insofar as the nuclear reactors are concerned, I think the Jaitapur thing and the 6 nuclear reactors that France was to build is something that will not materialize either during this visit or in the near future, because the cost factor remains a critical hurdle. And the French nuclear reactors are very expensive, and the cost of electricity that will be produced has to be competitive. And then there are those liability issues which still remain to be addressed. So those negotiations will continue. But what is of interest and which could move forward is cooperation in the small modular nuclear reactors, SMRs, which are 300 megawatts each. That holds potential. And this has been mentioned in the joint statement when Prime Minister went in July to Paris, and something will probably be mentioned during this visit. And the other area, which is not connected to defense, would be the International Solar Alliance, which has been initiated by India and France together. And in this regard, I think a concrete project of cooperation in a third country is being discussed and might be announced during the visit.
All right. And you're right, Jaitapur continues to be a sticking point. But you refer to China, so let's talk about that. India and France are key partners in the Indo-Pacific region, where China is perceived as a common threat or adversary. How important is the China factor in the India-French partnership of today? Does France see India as a countervailing force against China?
Yes, but France also, if you remember, President Macron, when he went to, I don't know which country in the Western Pacific. No, when he went for the G7 summit, in that interview in Tokyo, in Hiroshima, he said that he spoke up against the current U.S. policy against China, and thought that the United States was pushing China against the wall on Taiwan. And he said that we don't want to be caught up in this rivalry and just be camp followers. We should have an independent policy on these matters. Europe must have an independent policy consistent with its own interests. Now, remember, while France is worried about China's activity and expansionism in the Western Pacific and in the Pacific Islands, where France has territories, as well as the Western Indian Ocean, where France has major equities, La Réunion, Mayotte, and all that. There is a community of interest between India and France in meeting the China challenge and keeping a tab on the Chinese penetration in this area, in the maritime and political domain. But the big difference is that there is no direct security threat to France from China territorially, like we have, where Chinese are positioned on the border, they claim our territory. We have 50,000 troops on both sides facing each other, and there is no sign of de-escalation. And we've had clashes between the two countries. France has a lot of trade and investment interests in China. After all, China is the second largest economy, the biggest exporter in the world, and Europe needs China. So there always will be a difference in approach at one level in terms of French and Indian attitudes to China. But another level, there are good grounds for cooperation because both perceive China as a threat. And Europe is, as you know, becoming very conscious of China's systemic challenge, as they say, to Europe. They've been trying to divide Europe by this 18+1 forum that they had created with existing EU members and some countries in the Balkans and all that, to have a separate kind of a dialogue with China, things like that. So I think we must be realistic that we have a lot of common ground in terms of facing the China challenge, but it is not as if our views are identical in terms of how this challenge should be addressed.
All right. Final question, sir, before we let you go. In 2023, Prime Minister Modi and President Macron met about a dozen times at various multilateral forums, including, of course, the Prime Minister's visit to France. Does this visit by Macron also underline the deep and personal friendship that has evolved between the two leaders over the years? Has their personal chemistry, the camaraderie that we see, now become a significant component of the Indo-French strategic partnership?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. And I say this with inside knowledge, because I have had occasion to meet President Macron or interact with him in some context. I was there when Prime Minister visited France on July 14. I was there at the banquet also. I know for a fact that President Macron has a high regard personally for Prime Minister Modi. They talk to each other a great deal. They relate to each other very well. And France attaches importance to Prime Minister Modi's thinking and views and the manner in which he tries to address global issues. And there are a lot of reasons for them to have a dialogue with each other, especially about Ukraine and Russia and now the Middle East, what have you, because France, like us, would want stability, more stability in the larger European and Middle East and Indo-Pacific region. But coming back to your specific question, yes, there is very good personal chemistry between the two leaders. And Prime Minister is good at that in terms of developing personal rapport. He has a knack of doing it.
Most certainly. On that note, Ambassador Kanwal Sibal, thank you so much for speaking to us on Global Lens tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir. All right, let's quickly take a break here on Global Lens, but don't go anywhere. On the other side, we have a special interview with former Indian ambassador to the United States, Meera Shankar. Stay with us.
A defiant performance by Ten Hag's men. Now standing at 7 feet 4 inches, Satnam Singh is making his way into professional wrestling.
We are getting more good news for India.
Since the last 2 years, Khalistani terror groups are threatening Indian diplomats in Canada, US, UK and Australia. Investigations of these threats led us to the first ever abduction and killing of an Indian diplomat, Ravindra Matre, in UK's Birmingham in 1984. Our months-long investigation finally led us to the murderer of Ravindra Matre, who has been hiding in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir for the last 40 years. Watch our exclusive documentary, Murder of an Indian Diplomat, where we reveal the man who killed Ravindra Matre.
Stop searching, start streaming. Download the world's first news OTT, News9 Plus, ahead of the curve.
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है Money9। आजादी पैसे की, अभी डाउनलोड करें।
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha, Khanna, and we're discussing the French president's state visit to India. Joining me on the show now is former Indian ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Meera Shankar. Ma'am, thank you so much for joining me on Global Lens. Let me begin by asking you this. India and France are marking, as we know, the 25th anniversary of their strategic partnership. This is, in fact, the 6th time that a French leader will be the chief guest at India's Republic Day parade. Do you believe that this visit is a largely ceremonial one, high on symbolism, and that it's, more a celebration of the strong partnership and friendship between the two countries than anything else?
Yes, I do feel that is the case because the leaders met for a fairly substantive visit just in July 2023 in Paris. And so this coming so shortly after that will really be an occasion for celebration because Prime Minister Modi was the chief guest at their National Day celebrations, and President Macron has come as the chief guest for our Republic Day celebrations. But of course, underlying this is the fact that France is perhaps India's most important strategic partner in Western Europe. And particularly in the defense and security sectors. And the French, having, created their own autonomous space vis-a-vis the Western Alliance, even though they are part of the Western Alliance, by having their own nuclear force in the teeth of American, in defiance of the Americans at that stage, understand India's desire for strategic autonomy And both are powers, not necessarily, amongst the three great powers, US, China, and Russia, but they are substantial powers with a sense of the role they can play internationally to influence and shape outcomes. So I think there is an underlying element of trust and commonality on certain issues, which bring the two countries together. And of course, this will be an opportunity to see where they have progressed on the Horizon 2047 agenda, which they had laid out in July 23 while renewing their strategic partnership for another 25 years.
I will dwell on the significance of the strategic partnership in just a moment. But I need to ask you another question. It has been reported that President Macron accepted India's invite for the Republic Day function at short notice after President Biden said he was unable to come. There are some commentators, many in fact, who say that this proves the strength of the bilateral relationship. There are some who also have said that this sends out the message that India has many powerful friends today. How would you look at this?
Of course, it does send out a message that India has friends across the spectrum and many strategic partners who play an important role in our technological development, particularly in the defense space, nuclear energy sectors. I think France really has played an important role in these sectors.
Okay. So, talking about the strategic partnership, France became India's first strategic partner in the Western world. And for France, India was the first non-European partner. France, in fact, began transferring defense technology to India long before the United States took the decision to do so just last year. And as I was discussing with Ambassador Sibal earlier, significantly, France is a country that stood by India after our nuclear tests. When countries like the US imposed sanctions on us, France actually opposed those sanctions. Therefore, in your assessment, would it be correct to say that, and also not to mention the fact that France has supported India at multiple international forums, including the United Nations Security Council. Therefore, has France emerged as one of the most reliable partners for India?
Yes, I think France has emerged as a reliable partner for India. And I think the French position on India's nuclear tests, where they were the one Western country which did not impose sanctions on India, reflected their understanding of India's desire for strategic autonomy in a situation where it is surrounded by nuclear weapon states. Because France, as I told you, had, in the teeth of American opposition, exercised its own option to develop a small nuclear deterrent, which they have. They have their own nuclear weapons. And so they understood this. And they are now, I think, our second largest supplier, and also going beyond defense sales to joint production with their technology in India. For instance, our submarines are being produced with their technology. We earlier had the Mirage jets, which we had bought from France, and we still have some squadrons active in the Air Force, and those two were, the technology was licensed and we were producing them in India. Now, during Prime Minister Modi's visit to France in 23, they had discussed some additional possibilities in the field of defense, including 26 Rafale jet fighters for our indigenous aircraft carrier, the Vikrant, and then building of 3 additional Scorpene submarines with French technology in India. And these would really come to about $9 to $10 billion worth of deals. But I think the details and the negotiations on the deals are still ongoing. So no final agreement is expected during this visit. But those would be important agreements when the countries take them forward. There were also discussions on, the three pillars outlined in the Horizon 47 agenda. And those three pillars were partnership for security and sovereignty, partnership for, global issues or global challenges, and partnership for people. Now, under the defense rubric for, the partnership for security and sovereignty, they had really agreed on certain potential projects which could be carried forward under the Make in India, for instance, to develop a jet fighter here for our multi-role combat aircraft, and also possibly for our helicopters, and so on. I suppose those are still at a very incipient stage, and whether they will fructify or not remains to be seen, but not lacking in ambition in terms of where the two countries want to go. In terms of the second pillar, for a partnership for a better world, they really will be discussing aspects of climate change and biodiversity conservation or protection, and also eradication of poverty. I think these are the three aspects that they're going to focus on. And under the people-to-people partnership, my sense is that France wants to discuss greater mobility for Indian students, academics, research workers to go to France. They hope to have 20,000 Indian students by 2025 and 30,000 by 2030, and want to give longer-term Schengen visas to those who do a semester in France, provided they get an MA degree from a recognized university, and so on. So more mobility between people, particularly students, academicians, and researchers, more cooperation in the field of culture, for instance, in museology. India is, of course, shifting its national museum to North and South Block. So we would have the challenge of really adapting the buildings of North and South Block, which were not meant for being museums, but were really office buildings for use as a national museum. And I think France has extensive specialization in the field of museology. And so that would be something worth looking at, how the two countries can work together to see that we can improve our museology expertise in India, and also with regard to the new National Museum project. And of course, I forgot, in the field of security, we also look at the whole area of internal security, because France has also faced the challenge of terrorism stemming from religious extremism, and India too has faced it. So terrorism is one area where the two countries cooperate together. Cybersecurity is another. And the third area is really, the whole question of intelligence and information sharing, and upgradation of capabilities and technologies. So it's a pretty vast agenda on the security side. Globally, of course, we have the Indo-Pacific, where the two countries have a joint group and they cooperate with each other in this area, in the Indian Ocean in particular. And they've also had trilaterals with India, France, UAE, India, France, Australia. So they want to expand the area of cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. And right up there, right now, you have major global crises with the Ukraine war in Europe, which is still ongoing, and the new crisis in the Middle East.
Yes.
And of course, that's something which both countries would want to discuss, because I think the longer these conflicts persist, the more the possibilities of global destabilization, of economic consequences which hurt the developing countries. And so I think it would be, in the fitness of things for India to discuss what could be done to try to, bring an end to some of these conflicts. What is it that will enable, the ongoing conflicts to reach some kind of, stoppage of hostilities, even if no permanent peace?
Absolutely. And in fact, the relentless attacks by the Houthis on shipping in the Red Sea have already hurt global trade and economy. And let's not forget that the French president has been actually one of the most outspoken critics of Israel's war on Hamas, someone who's repeatedly called for a ceasefire. Therefore, chances are these issues are going to figure in the bilateral talks between the two leaders tonight. Let me ask you a different question, ma'am. A lot is said these days about personal chemistry between leaders, especially, I think, where Prime Minister Modi is concerned. Even today, we saw those warm hugs in Jaipur. I know there are those who believe that partnerships exist between nations and not individual leaders. But there are many who say that the personal chemistry and camaraderie between Prime Minister Modi and President Macron that has evolved over the years has now become a significant part of the India-French partnership. How do you look at it?
Well, I am one of those who believes that nations build their relations on the basis of fundamental interests. But good partnership between leaders can only help. It's a positive.
It is certainly a positive, but all right, it's ultimately nations.
Even if there are, good reasons for countries to be together, if the leaders don't get on, I think that can have, limiting impact on the relationship. And if the leaders do get on, then it certainly is a bonus and, helps to build the potential of the relationship.
Most certainly it does. You refer to the Indo-Pacific. So let's talk about that. India and France, as we know, are key partners in the Indo-Pacific region, and China is perceived as the common threat in the region. How important do you believe is the China factor in the India-French relationship today? Of course, it's constantly said that countries like the US today see India as a countervailing force against China. Do you think it's a significant factor between India and France as well?
I think that, India and France are brought together by their interests in building a defense and security relationship. And of course, that has spilled over to the Indian Ocean itself, where they would like to uphold the rule of international law. France is also active because of its colonies and bases in the Indian Ocean area. And so both countries have an interest in keeping open the sea lanes of communication. You've seen, the problem with the Houthis and the extra cost that this will add to all trade going from Asia to Europe, from India, for instance, to Europe, or from Europe to India via the sea, because it would have to go all the way around the Cape of Good Hope and come. So both countries have an interest in keeping open sea lanes of communication, ensuring the flow of trade and commerce, and upholding the rule of international law in international waterways. Having said that, France is not a neighbor of China, and Europe sees China as a very major trading partner, more so Germany than France, but France too. And I think they're a little more conscious now with America having, stepped up its efforts to convince its allies, about the threats posed by Chinese technology in their communication sector and so on. They're a little more aware, more conscious, because a lot of European countries which were heavily in debt sold out a lot of their, assets to Chinese companies, for instance, in Italy or Greece or, some of the other southern countries which were heavily, in debt at that time. And I think Europe has now become a little more conscious about this. And I think France perhaps, UK perhaps the most, because it's a closest ally of the US. But within Europe, I would say France perhaps more than Germany, even though, as I said, they do see China as a very important trading partner and would like to continue that trade and economic relationship for mutual benefit.
So let me ask you this question. Since you believe that Europe does see China as a major trading partner, it is believed that an area of interest for France are the ongoing negotiations for an India-European Union free trade agreement, because the French view seems to be that an FTA of this nature would help in rebalancing ties with China. How much of a role do you think France can play in, achieving such an FTA?
I think they could be a key player in these negotiations. And I think Germany would be perhaps the most important, because they are our largest trading partner in the European Union and the largest economy. But actually, Germany and France have often worked together to shape the European agenda. And while the negotiations for an India-EU FTA had been suspended, I think in 2016 or so, they've been resumed. And I think both sides are keen that they can give a push to the process and wrap up a deal. So France can play an important role in providing a push to the negotiations on the India-EU FTA.
Final question, ma'am. There are many areas of convergence between India and France. Do you see any major areas of divergence between the two countries? Now, the Russia-Ukraine war has been won, but it doesn't really seem to have had any adverse impact on bilateral ties.
Well, I think that, you can see that across the Western world, including the US, while there would have been more comfort if India had, followed their positions on Ukraine, I think we have been able to create understanding of our position vis-a-vis Russia. And if you look at the time that the Ukraine crisis first erupted in 2013-14, at that time it was Germany and France who actually helped to negotiate with Russia and Ukraine the Minsk Accords. So it is possible that these countries could once again play a role, and I would hope that they choose to do so, because an open-ended conflict, as it looks at the moment, where everybody says we are in it with you for the long haul, come what may, we'll do whatever it takes kind of position, which is an open-ended conflict. In a nuclearized situation, it's not desirable, especially when the framework of strategic stability between the US and first the Soviet Union and later Russia is coming apart, with both countries walking out of agreements. So you've had the US walk out of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, then the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, and then you've had, Russia, then they didn't ratify the CTBT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. Now you've had Russia saying that they are suspending the implementation of the New START agreement that they signed and ratified with Barack Obama. And also that they may stop implementing, or they may also withdraw their ratification of the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. So it really looks like the whole framework for strategic stability, so painstakingly put in place, is unraveling, and that's not desirable for the world.
Absolutely. The world, unfortunately, is witnessing too many wars at a time of great economic distress. On that note, Ambassador Meera Shankar, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining us, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow. We'll be back with more on the Macron state visit to India.
It was my 14th birthday.
On birthday, daughter waits
For missing father.
He was carrying a cake for his daughter.
49-year-old Birmingham-based
Indian diplomat vanishes.
He was grabbed and bundled into a car by 4 assailants.
KLA claims responsibility. Demands Kashmiri separatists.
Maqbool Bhatt's release.